Bird flu has been a topic of high importance to the Falklands now for multiple years, as local wildlife has been hit hard by the virus. Amandine Gamble is a researcher of infectious disease in wildlife and has been visiting the islands with a team of researchers for the past few years. The team are collecting data to better understand the source and the spread of avian influenza, which has impacted the Falklands so much.
We collect a blood sample, usually at the wing or the foot, and swab samples from the mouth and the cloaca. And we use the blood sample to look if they have antibodies against the virus. If they do have antibodies, it means they've been exposed to the virus. So it gives us an idea of not just the number of birds that died, but actually the number of birds that encountered the virus. And also, they might have protection given by the antibodies, but it's also giving us the direct information yes, they met the virus and they survived. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to detect those antibodies in those birds. And then we use the swab samples to look for the virus itself. So again, to say, there are actually that many birds that are infected, even if they might look healthy, for instance.
From October last year, the Falklands Veterinary Department detected 18 positive cases of bird flu and saw many birds die from the virus. The data that Amandine and her team collected last season mean that we now know where the flu came from and that some previously infected birds now have immunity.
It's good news and bad news. Bad news is the virus is everywhere. Good news is that it's not killing all of the birds, and it's not always in the good conditions to start an outbreak. The virus came from South America. It came several times, so we had several introductions. So for instance, one of the biggest outbreaks in the Falklands was on steeple-jason in the black-browed albatross colony. And we know we had at least 3 different outbreaks. So even if it looks like just one outbreak, it was actually 3 different introductions from South America. So we are still working on trying to understand, is it just the albatrosses? For instance, when they go forage, when they look for food, they get very close to the coast of South America, so maybe there they interacted with other birds and got infected. Or maybe because the very first few cases were fulmars last year, and so fulmars do spend a lot of time in very close to the shore in South America, so we think they could have get infected and then on the way back to their breeding site down south. So they don't stop in the Falklands. But we did find 2 dead ones in the Falklands last year. If we had 2 on land, when we're not supposed to see them, there should be hundreds of them dead at sea. So potentially albatrosses or other birds could scavenge on them. So maybe that could be a way the virus got introduced. So that's just, hypothesis.
Understanding last year's outbreak can develop a better estimate of how wildlife might be impacted this year. Having been out in the field across the Falklands for a few weeks so far, Amandine's team has noticed a more significant impact on adult birds, whereas last year saw mostly chicks affected by the virus.
So last year the virus seemed to have killed a few adult birds, but a lot of chicks. And it's a bit cold to say that, but it happens. Sometimes they have bad breeding years, and those birds have evolved that way. The adults live for very long, so albatrosses, they can do 50, 60 years. Penguin is probably 30, 40. So if 1 year they don't have chicks, it's not a big deal for the population. But if you lose adults, then it's gonna have impact on the population dynamic that we should feel for a long time before the population goes back to what it was before. This year the situation is pretty quiet in South America from what I've heard from colleagues working there. So we might have a lower pressure from the outside, but then the question is also, is the virus already stayed in the system over winter, which seems to maybe be the case based on the fact that we have a few reports of potential outbreaks happening over winter and very early outbreaks during the breeding season this year.
Viruses are transmitted in many different ways, and understanding how they transmit could help when implementing biosecurity measures or with trying to eradicate the disease altogether. Amandine's research shows that bird flu is more likely transmitted from the respiratory system.
Scavenging is a good way to get infected, because we find lots of scavenging birds that have either the virus or at least antibodies against the virus. It looks like you might need pretty close contacts. So for instance, on steeple-jason, you can really see empty nests of albatrosses and then nests with old dead birds and nests with fresh dead birds and then nest with live birds. So it looks like it was very much, centrifuge from the center and like spreading on some islands. So not all of them, but on steeple, typically we have lots of mice. So we could also imagine that the mice are, scavenging on one dead bird, and then the following day, like, I'm gonna check the nearby nest. And so, like, we don't know for sure, but it looks like you need pretty close contact.
Managing disease in wildlife seems near impossible, as movement cannot be controlled and vaccination unlikely to be considered. Yet limiting the impact that human activity can have on the bird species could help maintain species numbers, therefore ensuring a colony doesn't lose too many birds.
Any other constraint, like any other pressure that we're putting on them and on which we have control. So for instance, habitat destruction, interaction with fisheries, maybe introduce species, like those kind of things, we try our best to limit them. So if then they do have a tough year with an infectious disease, then they can, rebound after that.
Having this research on highly pathogenic avian influenza will undoubtedly aid the Falklands fight against bird flu. Moving forward, we may be able to better predict how the virus may spread, or target a specific species to limit transmission. Overall, better understanding leads to better management, and that is exactly what this dataset will provide.